This is Karen with newclevelandradio.net, and it's time for Care Notes with Doug Wilber. And Doug and Cherished Companions have been bringing you this program now for, believe it or not, Doug, I looked it up, 6.5 years.
Oh, really?
Yeah. It was like, I know it's been a long time, but 6.5 years. And the
Oh,
reason I
that's
bring it
crazy.
up is I've had a couple of people contact us and say, you guys have been doing this for a long time, haven't you? And it's like, yes, we have. But now Doug's doing something a little bit different with the program. He's doing a series. And we started off last month when you don't know better, we build institutions. And this month we're talking about home or hallway. And it's interesting that you say that because today on Facebook, there was a picture of somebody who just took their father to a nursing home and his room is in the hallway.
Oh, no. Wow.
I thought that wouldn't be
That's
allowed.
crazy. Yeah, me neither. I
Yeah.
don't I don't know how that happens. I've heard
Yes.
people overflowing in the hospitals into the hallways. I haven't heard that about facilities. So, yeah, that's pretty wild.
Maybe they were just preparing the room. I don't know, but that's how the daughter posted it. She said, Karen, I think you would appreciate this. And it was like, no, I don't appreciate it. Take your father home. So, where are we going with this pattern? Because, you know, as I've said many, many times on this program, my choice, like 77% of all adults, I want to age at home.
Yeah.
And um, my sons have been making notes and preparations and uh, things like that so that that can happen for mom if that's needed. But there are families that just can't handle having their loved one at home. So tell us what's going on.
So I want you to kind of, first of all, I still want to make very, very clear that there is a place for institutions, and this, is and facilities, and one of the areas is for rehab, that it is clear, but there are other situations where it really makes sense. But I want you to imagine two people, they have the same diagnosis, they're the same age, they have the same level of need, but they take two very different paths. And today we're going to walk through both,
Okay.
not hypothetically, but kind of structurally, because where someone lives and how care is delivered shapes almost everything that follows. Um, and there's the old saying, form follows function. I'm sure there's some tie into this, but it sounds profound. But no, I think that the truth is that where we do things, our environment definitely affects outcomes in life in general. So let's kind of imagine two mornings, and it's morning, the lights come on early, and I'm talking about in a facility, not because the resident chose to wake up, but because the shift has started. Aides move room to room to room, and they do that because there's a schedule to keep, and breakfast is served generally at the same time, medications are passed out on the cart generally at the same time, and care is delivered efficiently, professionally, and even compassionately, but it's organized around the system, not the individual. And 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 let's look at the home. The morning begins differently. There's no hallway to speak of, no overhead light turning on unless someone chooses that light. A caregiver arrives, ideally someone that they've known or are familiar with. Coffee is made in its in a way that it's always been made, the way they like it. Breakfast isn't at 7:30 because it has to be. It's when the person is ready.
Right.
The rhythm is not perfect, but it definitely is personal. Um, they the structure shapes the experience, and this is not about good people versus bad systems. There are absolutely extraordinary caregivers in facilities.
Right.
We oftentimes hire those folks that have been working in facilities, and they're amazing. And I've oftentimes said I can sit and watch if I was a fly on the wall in a facility, and I could very quickly tell you the good ones and the
Sure.
bad ones, because the good ones really care, and there are a lot of good caregivers within facilities. Um, and there are also struggling situations in homes. So it's not a matter of things being absolutely perfect in a home setting. They're not. It's messy. And but the structure does actually make a difference. It does matter. Um, and when you kind of break it down, you can see that facilities are designed around staffing ratios, regulatory requirements, risk management, and efficiency of delivery. Those are critical factors that play into how you design a facility, and how you design not only the facility but the structure that comes within that facility. Um, Homes are designed around individual preferences, familiar environment, a relationship continuity, and flexibility. And here's probably the key insight around that. Even when you have the absolute best intentions, systems still tend to shape behavior. It's really hard to break out of that. Systems have a way. It's kind of like um, bureaucracy. When something goes through a bureaucracy, it tends to get like rigid,
Right.
and even if there's good reasons why we have rules and bureaucratic things or whatever, there's a rigidity that is I would say most of us at one time or another have complained about.
Right.
So um, the um, the the other way around, though, it's not the same. Home is really home. That's why we have statements like "home is where the heart is," and the idea there's no place like home. That really does reflect something that I think is deep within us. It's our den. It's our place that we feel comfortable with. And if you I mean I think all of us have that feeling where you've been gone for a long vacation, and you finally get back home and you're able to sleep better. You're able
Right.
to to kind of relax in a way. You're not on the same high alert that you might have been, even unknowingly, when you're out and staying in hotels or even people's homes that you're visiting. There's a different level of comfort. Um, if we look through things, though, through a clinical lens, um, we need to basically step back and look at what the research and clinical experience suggests. There's a handful of things that we know. We know that familiar environments can support orientation, especially with those with cognitive impairment. And I've seen this over and over and over again. Someone will be in a facility, they will have um, a, a lot of confusion. And when they get home, they go more towards baseline or actually back to baseline of what they were like before they left. Routine is also important. And we know that when it's, especially when it's self-directed, it reduces anxiety.
Sure.
You and you're able to get into a very good routine, oftentimes at home, that is again self-directed, and so it gives some peace to that individual. And again, all of us know when someone else tells us what to do, if we're on someone else's schedule, there's a higher level of anxiety that's oftentimes associated with that. Um, Continuity of caregiver relationships improves trust and cooperation. When you're in a facility, you're having lots of shift changes, lots of new faces. When you're in a home, and if whether it be a family member that's doing the care or whether it be a good company providing the aids, there should be a limited number of caregivers coming and going. That's one of the, I believe, one of the signs of a good agency. In many home settings, individuals experience fewer disruptions, more consistent sleep patterns, and greater emotional stability. That doesn't mean home is always better, and I emphasized that before, but it does mean that environment is not neutral.
Right.
That there's a reason that environment affects, outcomes, and an environment is it can either be well, in any environment it can be therapeutic, or in any environment it can be destabilizing.
Sure.
I think that the home environment is more likely to be therapeutic unless it's dysfunctional, as opposed to being destabilizing. But if we talk honestly about trade-offs, I think it's important because there are definitely hidden trade-offs. Because oftentimes this is where families have the struggle. One of the things that is true about facility is they offer immediate access to staff. That is, they're always available when you're in a facility. Centralized care delivery happens. There's a lot of predictability, and there's relief from full responsibility. In other words, the responsibility gets delegated over a broad group of individuals as opposed to being on an individual. Oftentimes someone in a family feels like they are the ones holding
it together. Yeah.
Right, exactly. And but they often also require a loss of control over that daily routine. So it requires an adjustment to shared environments, limited personalization. There's only so far that people can go in personalizing care because there are the boundaries of being in an institutional settings and keeping on schedule and all those things that are important, and separation from home and community. And the home care offers familiar surroundings, of flexible schedules, one-on-one attention when it's structured in the correct way, and continued connection to family life. But it also requires something. It requires active planning. It requires financial planning. It requires family involvement and a willingness to solve problems as they arise. And one of the things that I believe is important is there has to be accounting of the cost. If you are going to be doing any type of care, you have to count the cost and say, I will, that this is going to require something of me.
Right.
And this is really where the decision happens. It's not theoretical at this point in time. You have to put in the effort to make a decision on what makes the right situation for each individual and each family, the big picture. One of the things I oftentimes have done over the years is I'll say to someone, family will say, well, we'll take care of the weekends or we'll take care of whatever. And I encourage that. I think that's actually really a good thing. But the problem that sometimes people have is life gets in the way. And one of the things I always warn people is if you're going to have family commit to say we will have mom every Saturday, the commitment has to be you're going to have mom every Saturday. And this is going to be like, in this case, like a job. And you have to view it as a job where you just can't call off. You have to go, and because if you don't, it's going to eventually become not a workable thing. And so I'll oftentimes say, just make sure that someone is truly committed to that, because if not, then you're setting up for the possibility of failure.
Sure, absolutely.
So when it comes to the effort question, and most cases, not all, but most people can remain at home longer than they think. That may mean a bunch of things. It may be coordinating multiple caregivers. It may be adjusting work schedules. It may be modifying the home. It may involve staying involved in oversight. And it's likely to involve that, of all the things we've discussed. And having difficult conversations, and the earlier the better when you're having those conversations. A home care situation is not a passive environment. It has to be active. It is not a set and forget it. It has to be an active model. And when it works, it is often, I wouldn't say always, but often works much, much better than being in a facility. But it has to be active. And one of the things I say is when we get together and create a plan, it is a plan based on where that person is at that point in time. And as a company, we make it clear, in when we're doing the intake, or I really try to emphasize this, that we will change as the needs change. So sometimes people need more care. They just they're getting older and they have more need for care. Other times they get much, much better. And so, I think about one person that we took care of, and I may have even mentioned this before, I don't know, but we went in and she was coming out of the hospital and she needed 7 days a week, 24 hours a day. And the great thing about it is we provided that for her. Eventually, she got stronger and stronger, and she recovered more and more. And at the end, I think we were doing once a week for 4 or 6 hours.
Wow.
Uh, and it was because she couldn't drive anymore. And we would take her to her, to get her hair cut and go shopping and do all of those things. But, obviously there was a big difference from the beginning
Sure.
to what we ended with. And the great thing about it is, as a company, we were able to adapt and change as those needs changed. And she knew she was getting better. She was still calling the shots and making the decisions. Um, what I think it's important that we need to look at what better actually means, though. If we are going to define it, better does not always mean fewer medical complications or lower costs or less stress. Sometimes it does. I would even say most of the time it does, but sometimes it doesn't. But what better does mean is the person remains in their own space,
Right.
and their identity is preserved in this process, and their preferences will continue to matter in a much deeper way than I think that they might matter in a more constricted setting,
Sure.
or restricted setting, and the relationships tend to stay intact. Um, it means they're not adapting to a system. It's this the it means the system is adapting to them.
Right.
And and I think you've had enough experience in institutional settings, unfortunately, that you can kind of tell that when you're in a facility or you're in um, a hospital setting, just a lot of things are being told you will do it this way.
Yep. You
And
know, we were, before we went on air, we were talking about my brother who's been going through some things. And his biggest thing, he's diabetic and he dehydrates easily, but he doesn't think about the fact that he's dehydrating. And so he gets himself so sick that he loses balance and he keeps falling and he ends up in the hospital. This past weekend, he was back in the hospital and they had him convinced for the first 48 hours he could not walk, that he would never walk again. And he called me up and he said, when I leave here, I'm going to be wheelchair bound. And I said, then where are you going? And he goes, well, home. I said, no, you're not. I said, your condo is not set up for you to get around in a wheelchair. I said, can you use your walker? No. Then my next question was, if you're wheelchair bound, you can't use your walker. Who's going to help you get up and down?
right.
And again, nobody had discussed this with him because he was pigeonholed as this is what it is. And so I threw a lot of questions at him. And I did talk to his doctor, and his doctor said, well, we'll send him to a nursing home. And I said, just like that? Like, can he walk again? Do we know that he can't walk? And he goes, well, he can barely stand for me. Make a long story short, physical therapy came in. They realized he was still dehydrated. They forced more fluids in him. They came back and they got my brother to walk up and down the hall with his walker.
Yeah.
So now he is not wheelchair bound. But one of the discussions we had was, even not being wheelchair bound, he is very dependent now on the walker.
Yeah.
He's got to make some modifications in his house. He also realizes that he has nobody to cook for him or grocery shop for him. And I said, then you have some choices to make. You can either have somebody come in and help you with that, or you could go to assisted living. He said, but I can't afford assisted living. I said, but you can afford to have somebody come in. He goes, yes. I said, then that's what you need to do. And you need to do it today rather than later. Now, he should have this done a year ago. And we've talked about this. And a number of people who have followed up with me on last month's talk, one of the big things I said to them was, start working on your plan now. Doesn't mean you have to put it into effect today, but know what it is. Know what the different home health care facilities are around you. Know who offers in-home care and what kind of in-home care. Okay, we're not looking for a babysitter, okay? And some in-home care is basically that. Somebody who comes and sits with your elderly person while you're at work or going out for the evening. That's not necessarily what you're looking for. And it's hard to make those decisions for our loved ones, and even harder to make them for ourselves when we are in absolute need.
Right. Yeah, your point is really right, as far as oftentimes things should be done beforehand. First of all, because it might have prevented some of the stuff from happening in the first place.
Right.
And I don't know that for a fact, but it might have. But the other thing is, it's much easier to make a choice or to think through things when you're not in a desperate setting, when you don't have to make the choice right now. We were talking about today that it's interesting when a family will call and say, well, can you have someone over tonight? And then we have to explain, well, we need to set up an intake, find out what's going on, make sure we match up and whatever. And then the person I was talking to in my office said, and then everyone really understands, oh yeah, you have to do those things. And that's what makes, everything come together and work. But, and it's almost like the thought is, oh, just turn on that switch. Well, it doesn't work that way. And in many areas in the country, there are now even wait lists, that are occurring for home care companies, and obviously that is, you don't want to be in that situation where there's an extensive or a long wait list. But I do want to cover a little bit about when facilities are the right choice, because I think this actually matters. The credibility of our podcast really requires, an honest look at the, we're not just saying, oh, home care is the only choice. It's the absolute right choice. I don't believe that. I think it's generally the right choice. I think it's generally the better option. But there are times when there are situations where facility-based care is appropriate and necessary. Sometimes when there's advanced medical complexity. And what I mean by that is, something that requires nursing. Now, there's a lot of things that families and others can do, but there are things that aides really, it goes out of their scope.
Right.
And so without having a nurse, and there are some things that just require. There aren't many things. I will emphasize that as well. There are very few things that fall into that category, but there are times when it does fall into that category where it is so medically complex that you have to kind of take a different pass. There are times, and again, it's rare, but where safety risks can't be mitigated at home. And there are also times when is severe caregiver burnout. And I would tie this into one other thing, which is, and there is an unwillingness to hand that over to someone else. And I've found that over the years, there are times when someone can put someone in a facility and give up that need to control or feel the obligation because it's in a different setting. Um, but if someone's willing to do it, oftentimes you can remove that pressure off of that primary caregiver that is experiencing that burnout. And then when there's a lack of available support, and maybe there isn't a family or isn't a good home care agency or something that would, undermine um, the help that's needed in those circumstances. Um, and when you run into that situation or those situations I mentioned, um, facilities are going to provide something that is essential for those families or individuals. And they're part of the care continuum. And, the other thing is they aren't, you know, kind of set in opposition to the care continuum. They really are an important part of what we're doing
Sure.
in caring for our elders. And the bigger question I think that we need to ask is, um, it shouldn't be not is it time for a facility, but have we truly exhausted what is possible at home? And I think that's important um, because I think too often we just default to institutional solutions. One time I was thinking about why we people go to institution, because the fact is sometimes it's inertia. That's what they did with grandma. That's what
Yeah.
whatever. But I but I also think that it comes from this sense um, uh, of if I put mom into this facility, then it takes the burden off of me, and it's like that I don't have to worry, right now. And the reality is that isn't the reality. The reality is you're still going to be having to go over there. There's a lot of other things, but there's that sense of I'm offloading this burden,
Right.
and um, and you're not. It's just going to
It's just a
take.
different one.
Yes, right, exactly. Because you're going to worry that they're not doing the right thing,
Yeah.
and I don't have control, and so there's all sorts of other things that come into play in that situation. Um, but I do want to kind of close on some thoughts. Um, in the last episode, we asked, the question, what we build when we don't know what to do is when we do the institutional care and I guess that's not so much a question as much as what we're kind of after, that we don't know what else to do. We're just going to build a facility. And today, I think we asked something that was fairly practical, and it's really, what does care actually feel like day to day? And for the individuals that are there, does it feel like hallways, or does it feel like homes? Does it feel like a schedule or a rhythm? Does it feel like systems, or does it feel like relationships? Um, for so many families, the answer is not obvious, but it's actually worth asking and worth working towards, because in most cases, with support and with intention and with effort, home is not just possible, but it's the better choice that that will make a difference in the life of the person that we love. Um, so with that, I just wanted to you know also think that if someone's feeling guilty because they've placed someone in an institution, don't, I and because each person has their own path, um and so often we kind of um feel like it's like getting on a toboggan. You kind of get committed
Yep.
when you're going down the hill, and so oftentimes we'll jump onto the toboggan, and it's going to go in a certain direction. It's a little bit hard to turn when it starts going that direction, and without pre-thinking so many things, we just tend to jump and go. But I hope that this is spurring people to think of ways that they can um, really pre-think things like we were talking about before, and figure out what is the best choice. You had mentioned something before and about how you're pre-planning things with your
Yep.
kids, and that's great because that's exactly what we should be doing. Shouldn't be a taboo thing. We all know we're getting older. We all know we're going to die at some point in time, and as blunt as that is, it's true. It's the human experience. So if we just acknowledge and say, "This is what I prefer," this is how I want to, and it's really taking control over what we can control, and pre-thinking things. So I don't know how many times families are doing this. I think mom would want this, or I think dad would want this, instead of knowing, oh, dad was really clear about this. You
And
know?
it's also interesting that depending on the facility, and I think this is really important, some to some people will feel like home, and they will get their social life that they need. So again, as I talk to my brother, in reality, that's what he personally needs. And he voices it, but he keeps saying, but I don't want to leave home. And
Yeah,
it's like, and I've told him, you've got to look at both sides. Okay. Either somebody's going to come in and take care of your needs, and you'll have limited socializing because you're dependent on them. So if you're only going to have somebody 4 hours a day, there's only so much you can do in 4 hours. Whereas if you went to a facility that you approved of, and that means taking a tour, going and seeing what's out there, asking questions, um, that might be better. And he finally said to me yesterday, well, my daughter's coming in town, so I think we're going to do some research this week. And I said, well,
mm-hmm.
that's good because you're getting to a point you can't take care of you. And I don't want a phone call from, the police in Southern California telling me, that you passed away in your apartment all alone. So people think about it because it's not a terrible thing to think about. We think about planning for a birth. Let's think about planning for living out our life.
Yeah, I will mention something having to do with that too, is that a lot of places, um, and I'll give an example. One of the counties in our area has a bus that will go out and pick up the elderly. Now it's a smaller van type of
Yeah.
bus, and so if someone is even slightly ambulatory, they're going to be able to go with that. And there's senior centers. And in those senior centers, there's all sorts of activities. They do, everything from uh, painting to, you know, different exercise classes. And um, uh, there's things like glass making, where they're making stained glass
Yep.
windows type of thing, and um, pottery, and people take a lot of delight in that. Mahjong games, all sorts of things that people are involved with when they do that. So there are different alternatives, and what I say is, um, look at all the different um, options,
Okay.
and reach out even to your local senior center, or if there's a department on aging, reach out to the department on aging, talk to them, say, this is, what do you offer, and how can I get there? And so often, um, those things that someone needs are possible even in those circumstances. And then there's technology,
Yep.
technology like a fall detector, or
Yep.
a life alert type of a system. Those things are all viable options to keep someone safe at home. They tend to be a lot less expensive. So again, as someone's balancing it out, the thing that your brother
Yeah.
might find is, he wants to get this socialization. He might find that by just finding these options, or he may find that perfect facility that he really likes. The only one warning that I would give you is, when you go into a facility, and this is actually important, you will get the dog and pony show. You
Oh,
know,
yeah.
and because they're going to put on their best face, it's and just make sure it's not, what do they say, lipstick on a pig,
Yeah. Yeah.
that it's really, the real deal. And part of that is really doing your homework, for it, because it's kind of easier to get into a facility than it is to switch facilities.
Right.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
yeah. So, well, I've enjoyed the conversation, and I I'm sorry about, the situation your brother's going through too.
Well, it's part of aging, and we're dealing with it the best we can. But thank you for that. And for all of you out there, have a happy holiday, whether you're observing Passover or Easter or nothing. Uh, Turn it into a holiday. Make it a great day.
Take
See you
care.
next month. Bye bye now.
Bye bye.